Welcome, everyone. My name is Ina Arenas. I'm a program manager in the Office Extensibility team. And today I'm going to talk about the preview of a unified API around Office 365 and Azure Active Directory services. If you were in the previous session, in Rob Howard's session, this is a little bit slower paced session. His sessions are always very fast paced. But he did mention a little bit about this API that we're introducing today. I'm going to be showing a whole bunch of demos around it and letting you know how you can take advantage of this API starting today. So what we're going to do, the agenda for the session is as follows. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about why. And now that you're coming from the previous session, you'll have a lot of the context on why we're investing on this unified API. Then I'm going to dive into the basic questions: why, what, and how. How is it that you can take advantage of it? What is it that is supported today? Along the way, I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of demos. And then we're going to talk about what you can do today, what you can do, what is going to come up in the near future. I'm going to do a little bit of a partner showcase. One of the partners that we worked previous to the conference, and in 2 weeks they made a pretty cool, awesome experience. So I'm going to show that. And then I'm going to give you information about how you can get started. So I think you've heard Satya mention in the keynote here and at Build, the most strategic developer surface area for Microsoft is in Office 365. And why these APIs are so important? Well, basically because this is the core to the organizations. This is having all the files, mail, calendar, contacts, the organizational structure, having access to all this data. It's what is so super important for the enterprise today. So making it easier for our developers to be able to interact with these APIs and build rich applications on top of them, it's going to provide great experiences for our users. So that's why this developer surface is so important for our company. And if you think about the numbers and the opportunity for the developers, we have a lot of data in Office 365. There are around 4 trillion emails being sent within our network, 50 million objects in the directory, and that's mostly users and groups. There's 60 billion attachments flowing around, 8 billion relationships on the Office graph, 850 million meetings per month. That's a lot of data. It's around 470 petabytes of data between consumer and commercial. So that brings me to why? Why are we doing this? Well, that's a lot of data, but that data is in different silos. It's in the different silos of the products that host them. We have the users, the files, the email and conversations, the calendar events, the people, and the groups. And each of them are in different silos. And this makes it very challenging for the developer, because if you want to access these APIs, you have to go to the workloads directly, as Rob was showing in the session before. If you want to access information about users or groups or just the people in the organization, you have to go against the Azure Active Directory Graph API, which is hosted in graph.windows.net. If you want to get extended properties around users, like the ones, for example, that are hosted in SharePoint and the user profile service, you have to go to SharePoint directly to get those properties. And the HD picture for a given user is actually hosted in Exchange. So if you wanted to get the pictures, you have to go to the Exchange endpoint. To get mail, calendar, and conversations, well, they're all hosted in the Exchange REST API on outlook.office365.com. Files in OneDrive for Business and SharePoint, you have to go to that API directly. And not only that, but you have to use things like the discovery service, which Rob was mentioning before, to previously figure out what the URL is in order to call the APIs. Because in SharePoint and OneDrive for Business, the URLs are dependent on the user and on the tenant in some cases. And then if you want to get the insights, well, you see my example right there. It's a pretty complicated query in order to get that information. So you get the point. It's pretty difficult. So what we're introducing this week, actually last week at Build, it's a preview of a unified API. One API to federate and aggregate the data across all of these different disparate services into one single endpoint. So what it does, it takes information that is stored or inferred across multiple Office 365 services. It exposes them through one URL namespace, which is graph.microsoft.com. It uses one authentication flow. Basically, it's just one access token, whereas before you had to get individual tokens for each of the services that you were going to access. Here is to just get one access token for Graph, and that's it. You can get to all of the different data across the Office 365 services. It exposes the same highly granular scope permissions that to access users' data that you all have seen in the Office 365 APIs. And it uses a consistent and unified metadata payload format. You get the same JSON, same type of errors. We have all the libraries, SDKs, and so forth that provide this great developer experience. So this actually breaks the silos. Let's see how it does break the silos. It first starts with me. I get through the API, I can call graph.microsoft.com/version/me to get all the properties for a given user. These are properties that are not only stored in Azure Active Directory, but are also properties that are part of SharePoint or Exchange. Actually, the flow of this presentation is that I go back and forth between these and show you demos. But the clicking didn't work for me last time very well, so I'm going to just go through the slides and then show you all the demos. So here's the code of how you will be able to make these requests. Basically, just the /me endpoint, and then you can also use the /users, as I will show next. Okay. So on the users, we can get to the organizational structure on users. We can get to the manager, to the direct reports, and to the groups that the user is member of. And here's some sample of this code. I can get to the manager just by doing /me/manager. I can get to that particular API response, and /me/direct reports and so forth. I can also get to the messages. And here's the code. This is for your reference afterwards. I can get to the events. I can get to the files. And in files, I can not only get to the files that are part of OneDrive for Business, but I can also get my OneDrive for Business, but I can also get to the files that belong to somebody else. And in this case, I will only be able to see what this person has shared publicly or has shared with me. I can access properties like created by, modified by, shared with me, and so forth. So before, I'm going to make a pause here and actually jump to the first set. Let's see all those requests in action. Try to minimize the clicking back and forth. So this right here is a web application, as any other that you could build. This one in particular is allowing me to make get requests against the API. I'm going to go ahead and sign in. I'm using a demo tenant in production. I'm signing in as Sarah Diaz at amgeek.onmicrosoft.com. And the first thing that you see here is this is the endpoint. Graph.microsoft.com is the endpoint where I will be able to go and get all the different information for this particular user and tenant in Office 365. Then we got the version, which is beta. And then we got the tenant. Like I was showing in the initial slide, I can just go to the /me shortcut and get all the information for that given user. And this is just basically a JSON response that brings me back. Actually, let's see the JSON. Brings me back all the different information about this particular user, like all of the properties that are in Azure Active Directory and properties that are all over the other services. I can do things like, I think Jeremy, if you were in the session before, he showed user photo. This one comes from the Exchange service, and I can get all the different photos that are part of that particular user. I can do things like select specific properties, which the $select statement. For those of you familiar with the SharePoint user profile services, you know the skills, interest, about me, and all these different properties are stored actually in SharePoint. So this is it. Once I'm not querying SharePoint directly, and I'm getting the skills for the sign-in user. And I can navigate the organizational structure. So I can say /me/manager and get the manager for that particular sign-in user. which happens to be Bonnie. I can get the direct reports for that user. And I get an array of all the different reports for that particular, for the logged in user. And I can do things like get to the rest of the organization, which, by the way, you can do using the tenant, Microsoft.com/users. Microsoft. Obviously not on me. So you can do it by getting the tenant, or you can use, again, the similar way as we have the shortcut for me, which is the logged in user. You can do a shortcut for the organization, and in this case, it's my organization. And I can get to all the users of the organization this way. I can get to see particular user's profile, like Alex D at I can get to that particular user and get the same way as I was doing before, navigate the organizational structure, look at their manager, direct reports, and so forth. I also showed that you can get to your messages, right? So /me/messages will bring me back a page of the top emails that are part of the sign-in user's inbox. And if there's, like, usually mail, there's a whole bunch of information, so you get a next link where you can get the next set of the next set of results. And here we support, like, OData query operations. Like, I can do $top and bring the top two. I can do $skip and skip the next page. But something interesting that I can do is I can do $search. I think Rob also showed this, a little bit of this one on the previous session. I can say $search and then say from Yina and get back a page of emails that have been sent to Sarah from the Yina account. So let's see, one of these emails was sent from me to this particular user. Good. So the next thing that you can see, you saw that we went to the directory, went to the user profile properties in SharePoint, went back to the email in Exchange. Now let's go to the calendar. So I'll just do in /events. And I get back all of the different events that are part of that particular user's calendar. This brings me all of the meetings that are scheduled, but there is actually a way to get a particular view on a given time frame. And I actually have this right here, because the time zones are not that easy to type. So calendar view, and then I pass in the different, the date window in which you want to get back the meetings. And once I send a request, you can build up applications that show up the meetings on a particular time frame. So we saw mail, calendar, then let's look at the files. If I just go to /me/files, then I'm going to OneDrive for Business for this particular user and getting all the files that belong to this user. And I can get to all the different files here. What I get back is a result of the files and folders that belong to this user. If I go and look at this, you will see that there's type folder, type file, right? I can navigate to one of these files directly from the API. And I can take a look at, let me see, just so you can /me. This makes it a little shorter. It's easier to see. If I go to a particular file, I can do things like go from SharePoint to AAD and get the last modified by user of a particular file. Last modified what this will return is not just the reference to that particular user, but it's actually the full profile of that user that modified the file. And you see the powerful connection between going back and forth between the services. Before, I will have to get the data, figure out what the last user was, figure out the ID that SharePoint was using, then try to figure out what the ID for AAD for that particular user was, go and get an access token for AAD, call AAD, and then get the data back. Now you can do it on a simple / last modified by user file request. Let me see. I not only can get to that user, but I can also, from here, get to the user's manager. Okay. So I see this one was Alex Darrow was the last person that modified that file. If I go to the manager, Sarah Davis is Alex's manager. So you see the idea there is all these powerful connections that are enabled via the API. So I'm going to go back to the deck and talk about groups. So not only we get to see the information of an individual user and other users in the organization, but we also get to see, get information about groups. In particular, around, well, we get all the groups. Groups in Office 365 can be distribution lists, security groups, or unified groups. I know that there have been a lot of sessions during the conference around unified groups. Unified groups is a powerful, awesome experience around Office 365 to bring groups together around the things that they do most, right? Like the conversations and files and calendar events and so forth. So they have this space where they share all this shared content. So we get access to the groups, and we get access to the files that belong to the group. We get access to the conversations that belong to the group, and to events that belong to that particular group. Let's look at that in action. Oh. Quickly sign up. For the groups part, I'm going to use my corporate credentials. And the reason why is because I'm going to be going against our pre-production environment. And right now, this functionality is in the production environment. You will be able to get to the groups and do management and get access to files and conversations, to files. And conversations and events are coming in the next couple of weeks. So because I wanted to show everything together, I'm going to use the pre-prod. OK, so I'm using the same application. This time I'm logged in with my corp credentials. And I'm going to go to the groups endpoint in the Microsoft tenant. What I get back is a list of all the different groups that belong to this particular tenant. That includes both unified groups, security groups, and DLs. And I can do things like filter on a particular group type. The interesting one is obviously the unified groups. Group type equals unified. So what I get back here is obviously a page of all the different unified groups that are part of the Microsoft tenant. I can navigate to that particular group using the ID. And you've seen that what we have here is for each of the individual entities, there is a specific ID that I can use to navigate, go back and forth. So there is the user had an ID, the group has an ID, and I can use that ID to go back and forth and get access to this particular content of that given entity. So I can get to this particular group. And then once I'm in that group, I can get to the group members, for example, and get a list of all the members that belong to this group. I can go to the group's files and get a list for all the different files that are shared files for this group. Well, they don't have files in this group. Great, I picked the best example. Let me try to get another one that actually has files. to get that, I'm actually going to do /me/join groups. And this will bring me the unified groups that I'm part of. Once this returns, I will be able to navigate to, again, the group's members and the files and the conversations and so forth. So here's a group that I know has files. So if I go to the files of that particular group, I get a list of all the files and folders that are shared across all the members of the group. And I can do similar things with conversations. And get all the conversations that are part of this group. So you see that through the same endpoint, I'm getting all the files that are in SharePoint, the conversations that are in Exchange, and I can do the same thing with events and so forth. Go back to. So that's groups. So how about so far? Is it cool? People excited? Now, the web application, I'll show it in a minute. Now, here's the next level of coolness. Here is the next level of coolness. I can not only get to the calculated relationships, like to the fixed relationships in Office 365, but I can also get to the insights that are part of the Office Graph. How many of you are familiar with the Office Graph? Office Graph is the brain of Office 365. It is what powers experiences like Delph. It is a whole bunch of analytics, machine learning, and a whole bunch of code that calculates what is important for a given user based on the activity that that user does on Office 365. And the first one of those relationships, powerful relationships that we have as part of the unified API, is working with. Working with is a people-to-people relationship, and it's calculated based on people that you email frequently with. So it's based on the Exchange recipients cache. It's people that you co-author documents with, people that you're in meetings with. So people that are relevant to you that might not be part of your organizational structure. And not only we have working with, here's the code on how we will access working with in a minute, but we also have trending around. Trending around is a people-to-document relationship. It is calculated in a very similar way that we calculate working with, but this time around is what are the documents that are relevant to me in a given point in time, right? Like those are not just documents that are in my OneDrive. They're documents that are all across SharePoint that are interest for me. Because I co-author those documents, I collaborate with people that authored those documents, and so forth. And I can not only see those relationships on the sign-in user, but I can also get to those relationships for other users in the organization. You can see. So let's look at that. So you asked about the URL. I'm going to show to you the one in production, because the one that you can use right now. It is, this is graphexplorer2.azurewebsites.net. And I'm going back here to the Graph Explorer, back to the me endpoint. And I'm going to say /working with. And what I'm going to get back is not people that are part of my organizational structure, but people that I work with a lot. Well, Rob Howard is here. You just saw his talk. And other folks, like this guy, is actually in the Azure org. He's not even in my own org. So I get all the different people that I'm connected to, not because they're a part of my organizational structure, but because I work with them on a day-to-day basis. And not only I can get to the users, but from these results, I can navigate to the user's profile. So I'm getting to the instance and the relationships to the fixed data. And I have here, this is Rob Howard's full profile from our directory. And like I said, we not only have working with, but we also have trending. And trending around returns me back a list of SharePoint documents that are relevant to me. They are not in my OneDrive, and they're all over the environment that I have. And again, with following the same pattern, I not only can get to the particular entity, but I can get to the navigations following these navigation properties. So I can get to the file. From the results I'm trending around, I can get to the particular file in SharePoint. Isn't that cool? So I have to caveat a little bit there. The first demo that I did was entirely from production. Me, files, events, calendars, and all the organizational structure, all that goodness from production. The groups demo and trending around and working with, I did from pre-production environment. We are rolling out around mid-May, which in about 2 weeks, you will be able to use it in your own tenants. But right now, if you go after the session and try it, it will not quite work there. It might for some of you, depending on which deployment you have. OK, so now I'm going to move into a little bit of the future. So we're working on integrating not only the big players like Files and Exchange and SharePoint and AD, but also other services like tasks, and getting tasks for the user and getting tasks for the group. And we're also working on integrating things like OneNote and getting the notes that are both part of the user and part of the group. If you haven't seen yet, OneNote has a cool API that now supports Office 365 users, and we're going to be onboarding that into the unified API in no time. This needs a new battery. OK, so that as we continue to make progress in this quest, more and more things will be added, and will be all added to this unified endpoint. And the power of the API lies in bringing otherwise siloed data together and being connected and enable experiences that otherwise they were possible, but they were quite challenging for a developer to build, right? For the user in Office 365, all these experiences are connected. Like you go through your mail, you go to your files, and so forth, and all that's fine. But for developers, it was a little bit challenging before because you had to use the discovery service, you had to get access token for one, access token for the other, figure out what are the different endpoints. Even if you wanted to connect the data, well, it wasn't really simple because the services were not using the same keys and so forth. This is one API to get access to all this information, all hosted on the graph.microsoft.com. So I'm going to go to a demo right now, and I'm going to show you. No, actually, this one I did already because I skipped it. I'm going to show you now how is it that is happening. The first thing, and Rob used this slide as well in his session, is that it's the same platform. So the same capabilities that you can do today, just going through the endpoints directly, you can do here. It is just an abstraction layer. We just connect the individual entities together and make it simpler for accessing. It's the same app registration for those that know about all of our Office 365 apps have to go and register in Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory is the identity provider for Office 365, and hence it manages all the applications that we have. The same permission scopes. So again, I mentioned in the beginning, we have tightly scoped permissions. If you want to access files in the graph.microsoft.com, well, you go to the portal and select the files permission. And so forth, you do all the other entities that you want to access. It uses Auth 2.0, same flow, getting an access token. This time around, we're only getting one. Same flow for OpenID Connect. It is just a single endpoint, single access token. And it's a powerful way to get to all the data that is connected via fixed connections or via calculated connections like the ones in Office Graph. So let's talk a little bit about navigating through the API. So as I mentioned before, hosted under graph.microsoft.com. The next thing you have in there is the version. Right now we are in beta, so you will see the beta version. The next step is the tenant. Tenant is the one for you to access to. Usually is an on Microsoft.com string. Or you can use, as I mentioned before, the shortcut My Organization. Then comes the entity set. We have a whole bunch of entity sets supported, like /users, groups, applications, devices, and all the different core entities that are part of the directory. Then comes addressing members of the entity set. You can do by using ID and a key segment. And for the different entity sets, you can use different keys. For example, for user, you can use the UPN, like yina@microsoft.com, or you can use the ID, or you can use the /me shortcut. Then comes the properties, and then we have two types of properties. We have just the descriptive properties, which is like name, and then you get the string name for a given user. And we have the navigation properties. The navigation properties are actually the ones that allow me to connect the data. It defines a relationship between a target entity or a target collection and actually another property or another entity. So a navigation property is something like we saw on users, a particular user/files. That is a navigation property. It's a connection between the user and the files that belong to that particular user. OK, now that we've seen that, and how do you get to all that is through the metadata. I have a slide later on that I will show you that. But now we're going to the demo. And in this demo, what I'm going to do is just to bring home the point that it is the same APIs. All our code samples for Office platform are hosted in GitHub. You can go there and look at all the different code samples that we have for our multiple services. And we recently, for the individual APIs, introduced support for CORS, for making a HTTP web requests across different domains, right? And there are already examples on CORS in GitHub. This particular example that comes here first is an example that is written against OneDrive for Business or the SharePoint API. And what I'm going to do in this particular demo is I'm going to download this I'm going to clone this repo. I'm going to modify it to use the graph. So this repo right here is calling SharePoint APIs directly. I'm going to change it around so that it calls the graph, the unified API endpoint. OK, the first thing is to clone it. I have my Git shell right here. Once that's cloned, see that it's already here. I'm going to open up this in Visual Studio. And when we upload the samples to GitHub, we don't really put all the libraries. So the first thing that I need to do is I got to build it so that it brings all the different references. It takes a little bit. So while it does that, I'm going to go to the Azure portal and show the registration experience of an application. So once you're in the Azure portal, you go to the Azure Active Directory node, navigate to a particular tenant, and then to the Applications tab. In the Applications tab, you will be able to see the applications that are both used by the organization and also the applications that developers in the organization are creating. For this particular session, I had already created one. But let me show you what is different from the experience of just going through the new. Well, actually, the only thing that is different is localhost. I put it on the sign-on URL. But the next thing is configuring the permissions. And to configure the permissions, so I mentioned that it is the same permissions that we have for other Office 365 APIs. Well, this time around, you select Office 365 Unified API as the service. And then you go and select the permissions. In this case, I'm going to enable sign-in, and I'm going to read or delete the user's files. This is basically gives me access to the files on the sign-in user. OK, so that's basically all that I had to do. Oh, one more thing. I mentioned core support. In order to enable an app for cores, what you actually have to do is you have to toggle a flag on the manifest. I've been promised from the Azure Active Directory guys that this is going to be better in the future. But let's see what the flag is. It's very simple. Is Control+. You see here 150, so you can see better. Allow implicit flow has to be true. It is false by default, but then you download the manifest, switch the flag, upload the manifest again, and then you're ready to go. So just going to close that one. And that's all I did for configuring the application. I should come back to the sample here. Remember what I did here was I cloned the sample code from GitHub. This particular sample code is built against SharePoint. It has the main JavaScript right here. Let me look at it a bit bigger. It has the main JavaScript right here. This one is using ADAL.js. Like we were saying before, you should not be writing code to deal with authentication and tokens and so forth. AD has an awesome library for all of the platforms that you should be using. It's very simple. In this case, this is all you have to do to get it configured, which is basically you pass on the tenant, your client ID, and the endpoints for which you are going to get access token. This section of the code defines the endpoints. So what I'm going to do is look at the files resource right here has, scrolling. The files resource right here is going against SharePoint, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this out. And I'm going to add the same var files resource. So you have to keep me honest for typos because it's quite hard to see with the lights coming. And this time what I'm going to do is just say, I want a token for graph.microsoft.com. This is change number 1 that I need to do on this code sample in order to make it work against the graph. The second change that I need to make is, well, actually, if this is not a change, this is just a config, you have to put in your domain. For this particular code sample, it's not that it's for all the codes, it's just this code sample, use that, and a client ID. So I go back to the Azure portal, look at the client ID for my application, copy here, paste here. That's my client ID. That's it. That's all I have to do for this config. And let's look at the actual file that is bringing up the results from the Files API in SharePoint. This one, it's actually making the API calls. So again, it has the base endpoint, which is actually making the API, the call. I'm going to, again, comment this out and then do base endpoint. And then just typing the graph endpoint. And then the next thing that I have to do is, because we're using beta on the API, I'm just going to do beta. And then SharePoint has _ API. We don't have that on the unified API. So I'm just going to do /beta/files, /me/files. And that's all the changes that are needed for taking this code sample that was before going against SharePoint and the OneDrive for Business API, and now getting it against the unified API endpoint. So I'm going to run that. And what I get, once it shows up, is a single-page application that is using CORS to get access. It uses OpenID Connect, and it then goes to the particular endpoint now in unified API. So if I get to the user, basically get all the, this is just displaying all the claims of the OpenID, of the ID token. And then once I get to files, then I get an error because Microsoft.com is not registered. Great. Thank you. You see, you're paying attention. HTTPS. Good. Should be just able to reload it here. Probably need to run it again. Let's see. Reload. Okay. Files. HTTP. Control F5. It's on the other file. Good. This one HTTPS, and this one HTTPS. Okay, let's try this one more time. HTTPS, and then the other one is HTTPS. My JavaScript is not ready. You see semicolons. Should be good, though. I can't hear you. The tenant? No, the tenant, you should not need the tenant. That's the whole purpose. It says still HTTP. Okay, let's try this on another browser. Yeah, always the cache, right? Like new private window. Starting private browsing. Cross your fingers. Ask me to sign in on Microsoft.com. Good. Now files. User, I get the user of files. No error this time around. I do have files. That was the whole purpose. Okay, we'll get back to it. You get it. I know you get it. It's all pure love. You get it. Okay. Okay. So what we saw in that demo was CORS, OpenID Connect, and the registration flow. I'm going to go to talking about what's supported now. So in terms of supported functionality, we have users, files, mail, calendar, and organizational contacts available through the API. Groups and social activity are with an asterisk right there because of the comment that I made around not obtaining production today. But there will be by the end of the month, or like actually even before that. Then we have all of the things that I showed today is on top of our commercial properties, like Office 365 Commercial. It supports Auth 2.0, CORS, full CRUD. Up to now, I've been only showing GET requests, but all the full CRUD support is also there. OData query parameters for doing operations like $top, skip, select, filter, format, and all of those goodness that you can use, all of the OData goodness that you can use to get actually the data that you're looking for. It supports actions and functions again, like, for example, send mail as an action or subscribe on the groups and things like that. And we have client libraries available right now for .NET, Android, and iOS. And we also have code samples on all these different platforms that are using the API. And then in order to go and see what is all supported, you basically just go to the metadata endpoint. And on the metadata endpoint, you get all the different entities and all the different properties and navigation properties that I was describing before. And it's a great way for you to know what are the things that are supported on the API. We actually use the metadata endpoint to generate our client libraries. So it is all the information that you need. With that, I'm going to go to another demo. Hopefully this one will work with a client library and some of that CRUD. OK, so let me stop this one. In this demo that I have right here, I'm building a Windows application. This Windows application already pre-created a little form where I'm going to put in the data. I'm going to show that form right here. It has a title and placeholders to get information around the user, getting the user's files, messages, and events. And it's also using the client library to create an event on this user's calendar. So this one is not interesting at all. I'm just doing binding on the data. But just to show you how easy it is, just with a couple of a text block, I'm binding the specific properties that I get back. And then I'm going to go to the main page. Okay, in the main page, what I have is the first thing that I'm going to do. Well, I'm not doing a whole bunch of error handling. This is demo code, right? But I'm having here my constants, which is the client ID of the app that I pre-registered for this particular application, the redirect URI of my app, and then what are the authorization string and resource URL that I'm going to use to get the token. This particular app is using ADAL, the .NET client library for ADAL, which is also pretty awesome. And what I have to do in order to get a token is basically create an authentication token, a context. Well, create and initialize an authentication token, a context, and then just make the call to create a token. So that's what I'm going to do first. But let me show you what I have here. So you remember in the form, I had a little button. And that button, I call this particular function, and I'm just going to add the code to get the token. It's just one line of code to get the token, this one right here. Acquire token async is the method call. I pass in the resource URL, the client, and the redirect. These other two lines of code, I'm just printing it out in a little message. And then once I get the token, I create the client context for my library, right? So here what I do is create a new client context. I pass in the service root, which is graph.microsoft.com, and I pass in that access token getter that I just put in. So that's all the auth pieces out of the way. And now I'm going to actually make the request to get the data. In this 8 lines of code, I'm getting data from Azure Active Directory, from SharePoint, and from Exchange. I'm going to the /me endpoint, executing that query, and binding it to the data on my form, doing the same thing for files, doing the same thing for mail, and for the 5 top users on the organization. Notice that I get the same semantics around like getting just take 5 or that allow me to just do the same thing that I will do with $top. Now, once I have the data, that's all gets, like we were saying. I can also do a post to do an event. So the post to do an event is a little bit longer because I have to initialize all the different the data, right, and the different types. So what I'm doing here is creating a new event. I'm adding an attendee to that particular event. I'm giving it a subject. I'm giving it a start date and end date. Let's see, have 5 today, right? A location and a body. So that's it. I'm going to try doing the send mail another way. That's basically it, the code. It's very simple and accessing all this different data. So let's run it. But before we run it, let me show not the failed demo, but let me show the calendar. for this gal here. So we have the calendar. It's just like a magic trick. You show the before and after. And then we have the thing. OK, let's run it. The thing that I want to do is I'm going to run Fiddler. Capture. OK, so what it's going to do is as soon as I hit my connect button, it's going to go against Azure Active Directory. It's going to ask the user to log in. Once it logs in, it's going to go against that authentication endpoint and going to get the code. Once it gets the code, it's going to go to the token endpoint and going to get the access token. It prints out the access token. And the next thing, it's making the actually requests. So you see graph.microsoft.com/me/files/me/messages. My organization and the top users are coming here, and the requests for events. And I get all the results that I was expecting back on the other side on my demo. So let's put that aside for a minute. And look at these requests right here. Stop capturing. This is just over. OK, let's look at the events request. And let me see if I go to the web form, do the just JSON format. If I just look at the JSON of this request, I can see that it sends out all the different things that we set up in the code. But in this request, I also have already the access token that allows me to call the API. So I can just pass it here. I'm going to use Composer. And I'm going to create, going to, against the, not the events endpoint, but I'm going to go against the messages endpoint. I already have the right headers here. And then for the request body, I'm going to add a request body that allows me to send mail. Actually have this here so I don't do typos on. So this is a pretty straightforward subject. I'm enjoying Ignite. Body, this is great keynote and sessions going on. And I'm just going to send it to this guy, Alex D. What this particular request is going to do is going to create a draft message on this person's inbox. And once I go to see Sarah's folders, and I go to the drafts, I'll see that one was just created. 9:38 is my local time. You see right here. It was just created this draft, and then I can send it from here. I can do a similar thing to send it. So using the API, one access token, you can get to all these different things, not only gets, but also creation. I could even go and create a file here and do, you want me to try that? No. We can even go and create a file, very simple thing, just name type and send it over, and it creates a file in OneDrive for Business. Pretty powerful stuff through the API. So what's coming next? We have a whole bunch of functionality that I've shown you today. But we also have a bunch of functionality that is coming in the near future. We have notifications and webhooks for all of the different entities that are supported by the API. We're going to be able to get webhook support on users, tenants, conversations, mail, calendar, contacts, and files. You're going to get consumer support, not only commercial APIs, but also the ability to get access to Outlook.com and OneDrive in consumer, as well as OneNote and Task when we onboard them. We're going to be able to get personal contacts. Like I mentioned, right now, the only contacts that you can get through the API are organizational contacts. And other entities like Task, OneNote, Skype, and so forth. We're already working on integration on those. Additional insights and relationships from the Office Graph. And for this one, we need your feedback on things that are in particular interest for powering your applications. And there's also extensibility story in terms of how the external data can participate also on the unified API. Not figured. OK. So I'm going to go to another kind of demo. For those of you, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Smartsheets. Smartsheets is a very cool application for allowing you to manage projects. We worked with them like 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks prior build, in order for them to start doing an integration with the unified API. And they came up with this cool idea that I'm going to show right now. Let's see. Jump here. So they built this concept of the work map. And the work map is a way for people that are managing projects to get a very simple view of what is going on their projects on a given time. And these folks might have information on Smartsheets or might have information on Office 365. So for this particular demo, I'm logged in as Sally Smart, a tenant. And then she goes and looks at case studies. And when she looks at the case studies, the Smartsheets app works. So refresh that. When she looks at the case studies, then, come on. Well, you can see they spend a lot of time doing the visualizations, which is pretty awesome. And they spend little time doing the integration with Microsoft. For this one, I have a plan B. I have a video. So I'm going to show the video. Let's see if audio works. No?
In this demo, I am Sally Smart, a customer evangelist at MBF Corp. I use Smartsheet, an online work management platform that helps my team coordinate case studies, roadshow events, and more. Every morning, I look at the status of all the case study projects that my team is working on. The work map gives me an easy way to see all of the work being coordinated and the people driving this across the organization. Here you can see the different case study projects and the people collaborating on it. Contoso case study is marked in red. I wonder if it's stuck in the customer review. The work map allows me to see not only my Smartsheet data, but also connect and bring all of my related Office 365 data so I can quickly triage this. The first thing you notice is that the people are now grouped by department. Smartsheet knows who is all connected to the work, but Office 365 provides insight into where they are in the organization. It gives me an easy way to see if I have all the right people collaborating on the Contoso case study.
This is powered by the Office 365 Unified API. Smartsheet does not store department information, but by connecting with the Office 365 Unified API, we are able to surface this information back to the user. This particular one is powered by the /users API call, which returns all the users and their departments.
The carousel on top shows me data from my Smartsheet project, emails, files on OneDrive, and more, making it easy to look at all of this in context. The visual columns in Smartsheet quickly show that ROI summary is marked as red, showing where the case study is stuck. Looks like it was assigned to Jamie. Wonder if Jamie sent me an email about it. The work map is context-aware and automatically filters and shows me emails from Jamie. I see a recent one here, something about lots of changes to the ROI calculations. Looks like John was also copied on this email.
This is a place where the Office 365 Unified API really helps us make the user experience much richer with our application. We can not only get data, but easily filter this to adapt to user scenarios. In this case, we use the /me/messages API with a filter criteria to look for Jamie's emails. This makes it real easy to walk a user through a scenario in a natural way.
Let's look at the files. I want to see what the latest draft is for Contoso. Looks like there is a new version 4 with some ROI notes. I need to dig into this one. Let me add a meeting with Jamie to go through this.
Being able to use a single API enabled us to pull data from OneDrive also. Here we used a scoped filter for file starting with Contoso. To keep the app super responsive, we also used select options to get just the name, last modified date, and file size, along with a link to the file.
Ah, looks like Jamie beat me to it. I already see one for next week on my calendar. We should be able to resolve it then.
Again, with the unified API, we were able to show meetings that were about Contoso from Sally's calendar. If one was not there, we could have created it instantly with all the context from across Smartsheet, email, and OneDrive. Here we used filter search for Contoso within a defined time span. The power of the Office 365 Unified API helps us create differentiated user experiences. This is just the start of the types of scenarios we can build for our joint customers, focusing on making getting work done really easy and flexible. It really enables us to empower users to work the way they want across tools.
There you go. That one worked.
In this demo,
Pretty cool. It actually took us like 2 weeks between we started talking with the Smartsheets team and them actually getting to the video. So it's really easy to integrate with the API in this form. OK. So what is the call to action? What can you go and do like right now after you leave the room? You have 30 minutes before your next session, so you can, oh, no, it's lunch. You can do it through lunch. So you can try it now. I showed the graphexplorer2.azurewebsites.net that actually allows you to do GET requests. And very simple thing, like you can spend the first 5 minutes. If you want to get to the next level of coolness, I will say go to the API sandbox. I'm actually going to show it right now. Because in the API sandbox, you can actually use your own code to try it. You can get the client libraries. There is a landing page, dev.office.com/unified APIs. There's links for client library, sample code, and all our documentation there. If you remember one thing, dev.office.com/unified APIs, then you will be able to get to the rest of the things from there. So let me go to the API sandbox. To remember to click here. API Sandbox is hosted on apsandbox.microsoft.com or .msdn.microsoft.com. Either one works. And what it allows you to do is I can get to specific code samples in both C# and JavaScript. It supports all of the different APIs, like against the specific endpoints, so against the SharePoint endpoint and against the Exchange endpoint for getting files and messages and so forth. But it also has a new section, which is this Office 365 Unified API preview section. And it has a whole bunch of code samples, like, for example, messages and profile and things like that. And it allows you to tweak things here along the way. So you can do your own requests and send them out. This is JavaScript. You can do your own request on C# if you want, and use the demo. There is a demo tenant that is hooked into it, so you don't need to have your own Office 365 account to use it. But if you have your own Office 365 account and want to try it against your own data, then you basically just you sign in and use it against your own data. And then once you have your code, you simply run it here. And what you get back is the full JSON. Well, they're parsing in a couple of properties and then getting the full JSON response of the API requests. The coolness of this thing is it allows you to tweak a little bit more on what you actually want to put in your code and then actually take it to your project. OK, so that's the API sandbox. And then, like I was mentioning, dev.office.com/unified APIs is the other place where you want to go and look for all this information around the sessions that we're having here, client library, sample code, and documentation resources. And basically being able to get to all the coolness of the API right away. Okay. So I'm wrapping up now. I want to reiterate on 3 points. There is this new unified API that makes it super easy to get to all the Office 365 data. It allows to break the product barriers and navigate between the siloed services. I can do traversing against using the API to traverse and get the different entities. And it combines not only the fixed data that we have, but also the rich insights and relationships that are calculated by the Office graph. All of that with just one single endpoint, one single token, very easy to get. The next one is our pitch for a developer program. If you have not signed up yet for this one, make sure you do. Like after you play with the API, then you can go to the developer to the booth and sign up. It's going to be sending you newsletters, and there have some cool giveaways like subscriptions to a whole bunch of things, tools, webinars, and so forth. So make sure that you sign up for this. You're going to be getting a lot of valuable information. Oh, this one is actually. With that, I'm going to open up for questions and make sure to evaluate the session. Your feedback is super important for us to make things better for me as a presenter and for the API as well. So thank you, guys. And thank you. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Is Yammer in the roadmap?
So the question is Yammer in the roadmap? Definitely. Yep. Very easy to answer. Go ahead. Do you want to come closer?
So once you get the access token to get into the graph, are the search results security trimmed from that point?
I have to repeat it so that it's get recorded. So it's once you get the access token, are the results trimmed, security trimmed? Yes. So the idea is that you get, once you register your application, you select the scopes, right? And when you select the scopes, that gets recorded in the token. Those scopes get returned in the token when the application request, when the request goes in. The service does the authorization based on those scopes and based on the permissions that the user has. So there's it's an intersection on user permissions, application permissions, and then it gives back only the data that both the user and the app are able to get.
Okay, thank you.
Is this considered the main API to communicate with Office 365?
The question is this considered the main API to communicate with Office 365? I will say yes in 6 months. We are in a preview right now. So if you wanted to do any production level development against the API, we will, at this point in time, I will say you have to wait. We're in preview. So the level of support that we can provide at this point is not the one that we have on the other APIs that GA'd in last October. But it's definitely the roadmap that we're investing because it does provide the better experience for our developers to get to all this data in a single way.
And are you using OneDrive synonymous with documents across all site collections, or is it just the OneDrive to the person?
So the question is this getting OneDrive across all the site collections or OneDrive to the person? So OneDrive for Business is a particular site collection that is created for a given tenant. The API is going against that OneDrive for Business for a given tenant. However, the results that you saw me getting from trending around, those were not on the user's OneDrive for Business. They were on files all across SharePoint. Yes.
Good.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other question?
Still need the request digest when you post in the API.
Yes. No, just the access token.
Okay.
Just the access token, not request digest, no canary this time around. Mm-hmm. Yep.
If there was a user that was concerned about other people knowing what they were what file they were looking at, or can they shut down or
So the question is, can we shut down or prevent other users getting to that information? Actually, this is something I didn't mention, to get working with and trending around is, again, the request has to have the right permission scopes, right? And in order to get those permission scopes, well, it will be clearly defined. You're going to get access to that social activity. In this case, for getting access to working with and trending around, you need to have access to all the users' profiles. And getting access to all the users' profiles requires admin privileges. So it is not such a on and off thing from the API perspective, although Delph does have an on and off switch on the administration portal. But you have to have the right permission scopes.
I think maybe feedback, maybe the VP, some executives, maybe they don't want this information distributed.
Yeah, they can.
They can turn it off. They can turn it off.
And per user, you can toggle on or off Delph. So Delph has two controls, and one at tenant level and one at per user level.
Yeah. Okay. Any other question?
And the API is able to understand that kind of thing.
Any plans to integrate this with SharePoint online sites?
So the question is, plan to integrate this with SharePoint Online sites? Yes. And you saw the first iteration on that, on the results that I got from Trending Around. Those results were files all over SharePoint. So all over the different, and we are indeed planning on having an entity collection around sites. But I cannot comment around timelines on that one.
And anything with search, enterprise search?
Search.
Yeah. Let's say you have enterprise search at site collection in SharePoint. Sites?
I'm going to say, sure. I mean, what we want to do with the API is to get at that point where we no longer need individual services endpoints and have all that functionality through this single endpoint. It's going to take us a little bit to get there. But then what we do in order to base out the priority of what we come up first is always feedback. So if you are particularly passionate about that, I would recommend that you go to user voice. On dev.office.com, you will find the link and vote for it. If it is not there, then create it and vote for it. That we definitely take that very seriously and based a whole bunch of our prioritization based on what we get back from the community.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
You talked about tasks, and you mentioned exchange tasks and unified group tasks. Similar to his question, are you planning to incorporate team site tasks?
The task conversation, it's a tricky question. So are we going to incorporate tasks? Yes, we're going to incorporate tasks from coming from Exchange and Project. Not there with team site tasks there yet. So again, if you think that's important value for your scenarios, I would recommend you go to user voice and vote for that. Yeah.
Someday, but not yet.
Someday.
Well, does that mean by doing that, that means it almost infers that that Microsoft is going to deprecate the tasks at the site level?
What we are saying is that we are considering how to make the task story better at Office 365 level.
I agree.
And we are making some considerations. If you have particular passion about the tasks, go to user voice and be sure that the SharePoint task is getting covered by this kind of thinking that we're having. Because right now, it's something that we are taking into consideration, if and how we want to take care about the SharePoint task as well.
The idea is to unify the experiences, right, and to be where users are. So we're based on not only the feedback, but also on usage, on where we actually get the big numbers is that we're...
The problem is if you have on-prem SharePoint and a cloud, if you have Exchange
Gonna
365,
cut this.
you can't
Thank
do
you.
tasks.